These are all what we would consider emotions. They're very fleeting. They tend to come and go, and they tend to rise like waves. Truly, emotion, developmentally speaking, is an earlier process. Think terrible twos. Anybody here have kids? So think terrible twos is really when this emotional aspect of the nervous system starts to come online. Emotion are feelings or senses that occur. We can either feel them in their body, we can feel it in our body, or we can have a tangible psychological sense of it. But these are things that usually arise, at least from a developmental perspective, to let us know what we're supposed to do next. Emotion comes so we know what action to take right now. Emotion comes so that we know what action to take right now. And we're going to differentiate between what a sense of self is and emotion, because they're actually two different things. But a healthy emotional range implies that we can feel a whole bunch of different emotions and be very okay with feeling a whole bunch of different emotions. To recognize that we have different parts, that we have different rhythms, and to really be okay with the fact that just because I might have a sense of sadness or grief or anger or excitement or joy does not imply that I am inherently an angry person, a joyful person, a sad person. But these are just little blips on the radar screen, and the healthiest psychological and healthy individuals can look at this and just sort of dance with it all. And that we know that all emotion is basically energy in motion. It's just body's energy in motion, and it's helping us to know what to do next. So if I have a foreboding sense of anxiety about this talk, and I realize, oh my God, I didn't make up handout sheets for everybody.
And they're waiting for them.
And they're waiting for them. So what would be, so instead of thinking, so here's where emotion can turn into psychological junk. Because I can say, oh, you see, so I can say, okay, well, that anxiety really means I need to do this next time, and I need to allot time for it. No big deal. And it's just a mistake. It's a mistake, and I get to do it over again next time. Really not a big deal. Has no implication of my character, who I am. But now let's say that then turns into something like a little gremlin. And all of a sudden it says, see, you never quite get it right when you talk to people. You see, this is, oh, I did it again. And now it becomes the foreboding sense of pervasiveness, permanence, and I take it personally. That's not what emotion is for. You know, I can also feel great gratitude and joy for sitting with you guys. And I know that basically that's just telling me probably to do more of that and to connect with you more as people, to build meaningful relationships, to contribute socially. So emotion is just a really beautiful thing. And I am of the belief that all human beings, even the best of us, and I don't even know if I put myself in that category, are going to experience a very full range of emotion. From the ones that we would consider so-called negative, quote unquote, to the ones that we'd consider so-called positive. Now, the reason this relates to the human brain and nervous system is obvious. Well, much of the chemicals of emotion that are produced are being produced in certain centers of our brain, and actually all of our organs. So if you have the emotion of being jittery, your white blood cells are actually creating jittery hormones. Very interesting. If you're feeling exhilaration and joy, your kidneys are actually producing little chemicals that mimic the sense of exhilaration. And these little chemicals, think of them as like door-to-door salespeople. They go knock on the doors of all the houses and then give their gift. It's very interesting. So it's the more balance and range we have with this, we actually have, therefore, a lot of energy and motion, and we tend to be very healthy. The key is that if I have an angry thought that says, you know, how dare you tell me how to run my talks? And not that I thought this, but I'm just trying to use this as an example. Tell me to have handouts. You know, the key would be to recognize that thought in myself, to recognize that feeling, and to say, well, this person actually has a lot of merit in what they're saying. It doesn't really affect my sense of self, so, you know, just let the feeling pass, and it's okay. Right? I didn't have that thought, just for the record.
Just for the record.
I was actually very curious, and I thought you had a very good point. Not that I don't have angry thoughts or you know, protective things, or reactive things. I do, you know, on a regular basis, like I would imagine that a lot of us do. You know, Abraham Maslow had this great quote, and he said, I love Abraham Maslow, and he basically said, you know, we're either contracting into safety or we're springing forward into growth. You know, there's not a lot of middle ground in there. And so when we're really okay with our emotion and we're allowing it to be full and have a full range and have some great awareness of this, and then to take action, healthy action based on that, we're really springing forward into growth. lot of times if we experience negative emotion and we clamp down and move into safety, this is actually activating the lizard brain stress response, which is more retreating into growth. And I would argue that for the most part, we're not going to be living this flourishing on every level to the proportional extent that we're sort of in lizard brain checkout. I don't want to grow, I want to be safe. Make sense? So this is the gift of emotion. Now, the way it relates to the spine and even to posture is that most of the receptor sites for emotion are in the back aspect of the spinal cord. So those receptor sites get habituated to certain emotions based on our posture. So if my posture is this, it implies that there's a heavy sense of foreboding. There's a sense that maybe some poor self-esteem. You know, I've always kind of screwed it up and I always will. There's not enough love. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. Whatever the story may be, this tends to actually create receptor sites that are going to be very addicted to, literally, and sensitive to basically predominant emotions of anger, fear, stuff like this. As our posture gets more motion and our body has more motion, we're actually physiologically able to experience a fuller range of emotion. And a lot of times when an emotion is very painful for us, and we've all had this, and we don't want to be with it, the body will often lock an area down, you know? So remember, emotion is energy in motion, and painful emotions will often cause and relate to a loss of a range of motion in our body. So a deep sense of betrayal or loss early on in our life, a deep sense of anger that we experienced or we couldn't express, I find often shows up in this loss of range of motion in the bottom part of the spine and the shoulders. You know, a sense of really not knowing our identity and not being okay that, you know, think of someone who grew up in a very traditional, you know, Jewish home where you're supposed to, you know, be a doctor or be a lawyer, that this is really built in the culture, or I'm a Jewish woman and I'm supposed to marry someone who's going to take care of me, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I'm an artist, I'm a passionate artist, I don't care about money, I want to be on the streets playing, this is what brings me great joy. If that wasn't okay, and if that emotion of that passion wasn't okay and it got locked down, I often see this get locked in people's sacrums and produce low back pain. Things like that. So there's 1,000 examples, but the emotions that we can't fully be with, I find will correspond to a loss of motion in some part of the body. And I don't think there's a lot of rules for it. I mean, anything can go, but you know, a sense of being very brokenhearted and not really being fully with the emotion of grief will often cause a forward bending of the shoulders and a locking down of the sternum, which studies show as actually increases men's risk of coronary incidents by 42%. So our posture has an incredible effect on function, which is really the next point. So the better function we have, the greater our emotional range is. And by having a healthier emotional range, we can also go the other direction and improve function overall. Isn't this amazing? So we can, by having a healthier emotional range, by cultivating practices that heal our nervous system and brain, we're actually able to improve the function overall. It's very cool. As an example, just had a gentleman come. He drove from Winston-Salem to see me, and he said, I've had this pain in my chest, and I've had all these stress tests and EKGs. And I said, well, what did they say? He said, well, everything's normal. They just said you're stressed. So I said, so your stress test was negative, but they're telling you you're stressed. Okay.
Something wrong with this picture.
Well, they're in. So those tests being negative, meaning his heart was healthy, doesn't imply that he's flourishing and well-being. And I said, well, when did this start? What was going on when this started? And he said, well, it was the same time my thyroid shut down. And I said, well, what happened to your thyroid? He said, well, I just stopped working. And I said, well, what was going on in that? What was happening in your life? It's because you've talked to the other people, and they're telling you nothing's wrong. So just play with me. What was happening in your life? He said, well, I was in love with a woman that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and she dumped me. Now, from an archetypical perspective, the throat chakra has a lot to